Hey everybody, in this module we want to finish up talking about the quadratic formula. And what I want to point out is the most important part of that whole formula. The key part of the quadratic formula is the piece underneath the square root symbol, the b squared minus 4ac. And why is that part of the formula so important? Because remember, we're doing the operation square root. And we know there are certain numbers we can square root, perfect squares. There are certain numbers that we cannot square root at all, negative numbers. And we know there's certain numbers that when we square root them, we still have a radical sign, like a number that's not a perfect square. What's underneath that square root has a special name. We call the number we get under there the discriminant. So say that word with me, discriminant. So when you hear the word discriminant, that's asking you what is the one number we get underneath the square root symbol when we calculate b squared minus 4ac. Now, I've listed on the PowerPoint 4 scenarios that could happen. And these should all make sense because we've already gone through this. If the value of b squared minus 4ac, if what's underneath that square root is a positive number and is a perfect square, that means we'll be able to square root it and get a whole number. So that means we're always going to get 2 answers for x that are real and rational. So for example, if underneath that square root we get a 49, that tells me I could do the square root of 49, which is 7, and when I finish my calculation, when I add my numerator and then divide by my denominator, I will get a number that's either whole or a fraction. So if the discriminant, what's underneath the square root, b squared minus 4ac, is a positive number and a perfect square, you are guaranteed to get 2 answers that are real and rational. If underneath that square root symbol, your discriminant is a positive number but not a perfect square, which we've all seen this before. If underneath that square root symbol we have the number 108, well, that's not a perfect square number. We could break it down. We know in 108, the perfect square in there is 36. That's 36 times 3. And we know that would give us 6 square roots of 3 when we simplify it. So if underneath that square root, your discriminant is a positive number but not a perfect square, that guarantees you are going to get 2 answers that are real. But instead of being rational, they're going to be irrational because they're still going to have a square root symbol with them. If under the square root you get the value of 0, the discriminant is 0. We all know, we've all seen adding 0 and subtracting 0 to what's in the numerator doesn't change it. So when that discriminant is 0, we don't get 2 different answers for x, we get 2 of the same answers. So what really happens is we get 1 real rational solution. And last but not least, if what's underneath that square root, the discriminant is a negative number, we know we cannot perform a square root of a negative number, which tells us we will have no real solutions. So what's underneath the square root symbol, which we call the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, is a little trick. It helps us know what types of answers we should get for x without actually figuring out the answers. So if you look at the PowerPoint, I have a quadratic equation. 4x squared minus 3 equals 0. I am not asking you to get the answers for x. This does not say solve for x. It says describe the solution set. It's saying describe in words the answers for x. Well, if I want to know what types of answers I'm getting, I don't have to work the whole quadratic formula. I only have to work what's underneath the square root, the b squared minus 4ac. So to work b squared minus 4ac, which is called the discriminant, first I need to know my values of a, b, and c. So let's look at our equation. A is 4. B is 0 because there is no x term. C is negative 3. Now let's work that part of the formula. B squared would be 0 squared minus 4 times A, which is 4, times C, which is negative 3. So now if I perform that calculation, I would square first. 0 squared is 0. Then I'd multiply my three numbers. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Negative 16 times negative 3 would be positive 48. So now I have 0 plus 48, which is 48. So I would call that number the discriminant. That part of the quadratic formula, that number you get when you work what's under the square root, is called the discriminant. Well, your discriminant is 48. 48 is positive, but it's not a perfect square, which guarantees if I was working the whole formula out, it would guarantee that my two answers for x would be real, but they would be irrational numbers. Because to work a square root of 48, you would have to simplify it, and you would still have a square root as part of the answer. So, the moral of the story is this. If you're asked to solve for x, then you have to work the whole quadratic formula. But if you're asked just to describe the types of answers you would get for x, you only have to work the part of the formula that's under the square root, the b squared minus 4ac. And it's given a special name. It's called the discriminant. Let's go to the whiteboard now.